What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here coming at y'all with a SWAC Week 4 recap. I'm going to start doing these episodes every Monday, 8 a.m. Central Time, dropping right here on our YouTube channel. I've heard a lot of feedback on other people's channels on our comments that a lot of people aren't talking about the SWAC as a whole enough. They've really just been focusing on one team. So I wanted to bring these SWAC recaps. To you guys so we can kind of recap everything that happened in the SWAC. We might not break down every single game, but I'll at least give the scores and kind of a brief overview of what happened. And also, this episodes, I don't want to be like 2 hours long. I want y'all to be able to listen to these on the way to work, things like that. So I'll just kind of go through what happened in each game, my main takeaways, and just keep it pushing. And also, I'll usually focus on like the top 2 or 3 games of the week and then kind of give my final takeaways and look ahead to the next week. So we're kicking it off with week 4 right here. And we got to start with the Thursday night game, man. Alcorn storms back, to say the least, against Arkansas Pine-Bluff to get the 39-38 win, on the road in prime time on Thursday night on ESPNU. It was an absolute classic game, man. It was such a fun one to watch. If you were not in the off-script watch party, man, it was a great game, man. Everyone was freaking out at the end of the game, and the Braves overcame a 26-7 halftime deficit to win their SWAC opener and defeat the defending SWAC West champions who, won it in the spring, which was the UAPB Golden Lions team. But it was a tale of two halves on Thursday, man. Alcorn outscored UAPB 32-12 in the second half, and they finally showed, at least for me, guys, they finally showed that offensive explosiveness that so many people talked about this preseason and over this summer. Everyone thought Duffy and Harper and these wide receivers were going to be able to put points up on almost anybody, and we haven't seen that all season. And in the first half, it definitely looked like they weren't going to be able to do that. But in the second half, they came alive. And also, I want to give a shout out to Alcorn's defense in the second half, holding UAPB to 6 total points. The other points in the second half coming off of a punt return touchdown. Then, of course, UAPB goes for 2 on both of those scores and misses both, which ultimately costs them the game. But that's where I want to get at with this is such a what if type game for UAPB, where they're going to look back in December, January and be like, man, if we just kick extra points, we win that game over Alcorn and probably take control of that West Division. I want to see how they respond, guys, because when you look at teams who lose in a close game like this, they respond one of 2 ways. They either recover from it and play even better in the following weeks and learn from their mistakes, or it just kind of takes the wind out of their sails and they have some lackluster performances following this. I'm imagining UAPB responds in a big way, but you never know, just because this is such a crushing loss when you are up so big and allow arguably your biggest challenge in your division to come back and upset you at home as well. And there were some very questionable calls by the coaching staff at UAPB as well. I know in the second quarter they had their extra point block, but then in the second half, they go for 2-point conversions on both of their second half touchdowns, which really came to bite them, because at the end of the game, you kick those field goals and you kick those extra points and you win the game. And I've always said this. You guys can go check the tapes from our Power 5 content, all that. I have always said you should never go for 2 unless you absolutely have to. Always take the points, especially if you're in the lead. Always take the points, because you're always going to regret losing those points if you do not convert the 2-point conversion. And that happened to UAPB on Thursday night. Now, it also kind of didn't help that they had 4 turnovers that absolutely killed the momentum. 2 of them came while they were driving in Alcorn territory, and that they proved to be a major role in this comeback bid, because if they even get a field goal there or 2 field goals on those drives, the game is probably never in reach again for Alcorn. But the 4 turnovers absolutely killed UAPB's momentum in this game. Now, for the Alcorn offense, The biggest shift in the second half for me was the rushing attack, and it opened up some one-on-one opportunities outside for Harper and this wide receiving core to really take advantage of this UAPB defense deep, and that's exactly what they did. Nico Duffy finally showed why he was getting so much hype this preseason as one of the better running backs in the conference. And if he can replicate this 142-yard, two-touchdown performance, Alcorn is going to be a problem for a lot of SWAC teams. Now, Harper's first half atrocious. Let's just keep it 100. He played an absolutely horrible game in the first half. Part of it because the offensive line was just abysmal at times, but in the second half, he really put it together. He wound up with over 360 yards passing, 3 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and had a really bad interception in the first half that was eventually taken back for a touchdown on a screen pass. But he's got to be more efficient as a passer, guys. Only 50% of his passes were complete. That's the number one thing I've been screaming has been missing in his game is the efficiency and the effectiveness. And that almost came back to bite them. And it did hurt them a lot in the first half of this game. But they found a way to win. That's what separates real contenders in any conference, any level of football from the people who finish middle of the pack. Alcorn found a way to win on the road, so they get a huge opening SWAC win, but they have a bye week next week moving forward, but they return home to host Grambling in 2 weeks, while Arkansas Pine-Bluff gets another Thursday night matchup this upcoming Thursday to face Prairie View A&M in another big SWAC matchup in primetime on ESPNU. So that's what to look forward to there. But I want to move on here to, I think, arguably the second. I honestly think this game was so underrated, but I would say probably the second best game of the weekend. Alabama State gets a statement win over Bethune-Cookman, 38-24, in a game where I don't know if a lot of people were giving the Hornets much of a chance. I think this might have been the quietest significant win for any team in the SWAC this year because everyone has been sleeping on Alabama State, and a lot of people thought that Bethune was disrespected by finishing so low in the division. And this is one of those games when you're a mid-level team in your division. If you win this game, it moves you up to that next tier of teams. And now you're talking about Alabama State having a chance to finish third or fourth in the East, potentially, if they can beat FAMU in this upcoming game, and or if they pull up a big upset over A&M or Jackson State, how could they finish second even? So this was a huge win for Alabama State. They were written off because they struggled with Miles week 1, and then they got beat 62-0 by Auburn. But and on the flip side, Bethune was getting so much hype after a close P5 loss, and also keeping it close with Alabama A&M down the stretch last week really had this team on a whole nother level. The Alabama State defense, though, continues to be overlooked, and they showed this weekend that they are legit and they're going to carry this team and keep them competitive in some really big games. Now, Bethune, on the other hand, falls to 0-4. 0-2 in the SWAC now with the 2 losses to both Alabama teams in A&M and Alabama State. And I think you have questions, realistic questions on both sides of the ball about Bethune-Cookman because they could not find any running room. They ran the ball all up and down Alabama A&M, but was that attributed to Alabama A&M's defense being so bad, or was it that they have a legit rushing attack? We have to find out, and they still have major turnover issues, which really hurt them this week and set Alabama State up to get a few easy scores on the board and ultimately cost Bethune any chance of winning this game. Now, I do want to say, I believe it's Averett, the tight end for Bethune, is an absolute matchup nightmare. That guy accounted for over half of the total offense for Bethune this weekend at tight end with 9 catches, 140 and a touchdown. He is a problem. He was a problem last week against Alabama A&M, and he again was a matchup nightmare and a problem for Alabama State. And I don't see anyone in the SWAC right now that has a defender that you can put on him and be confident they can defend him because he's too big for cornerbacks. I think he's still too big for a safety. He's like 6'6", man, and then he's too athletic for a linebacker. So I don't know if anyone in the SWAC has a great person to put on him and lock him down. So he's going to be a problem, but they got to solve that running game because the running game was absolutely atrocious this weekend. Now, Alabama State defense was the MVP of this game, like I said. They forced repeated turnovers, and they held Bethune to only 12 rushing yards on 20 carries, guys. That is a whopping average of 0.6 yards per touch for Bethune-Cookman. They only put up 259 yards of total offense and turned the ball over 4 times. That Alabama State kept Bethune on their toes. They kept them out of rhythm, and they kept them uncomfortable all game. And if they can replicate that against some of the other teams they have on their schedule, Alabama State's going to be a tough out for anybody. And the number one thing they did by stopping the run game is they kept Bethune in 3rd and longs all game, and therefore Bethune was only 2 for 12 on 3rd downs. You cannot beat a team like Alabama State by going 2 for 12 on 3rd downs. You can't beat almost anyone doing that. Now, for Alabama State, I do want to say they have to run the ball a bit more consistently, but because of the turnovers of this game, they were able to afford sticking with their game plan, running the ball, even if they weren't being super consistent with it. Ja'Cory Merritt, Ezra Gray were the feature backs, and the Hornets ended up running for over 110 yards and 3 touchdowns, but they only averaged I believe it was 3 or 4 yards per carry, which isn't great. But being able to rely on that run game because you have short fields and because you have a lead, and therefore you don't have the pressure to really have to air it out in unnecessary situations, they were able to stick with their game plan and pull this one out. Now, Nettles did have 2 big turnovers, but since Bethune just was given the ball away for free, Nettles, was able to play smarter late and found a way to make enough plays to win the game. 262 touchdowns, had those 2 picks. But if he can avoid turnovers moving forward, Alabama State is going to make some intriguing matchups later in the season, but Nettles has to continue to develop as a passer, and that's going to be my biggest question for Alabama State moving forward is which Ryan Nettles are you going to get, and how good can he be in this offense? That's going to be the biggest question mark for Alabama State, and right now, if you're going to want to compete with the top of the SWAC, with the Akil Glasses, with the Shedeur Sanders, you're going to have a quarterback that's going to be able to throw against those teams and keep up with what they can do on that side of the ball. So that's going to be the number one question I have about Nettles. But looking ahead, man, Bethune looks for their first win of the season next week against a former MEAC foe in South Carolina State on the road, while Alabama State, man, looks to make it 2-0 against SWAC newcomers when they head down to Florida to take on Florida A&M. And in my opinion, that's the game. That's probably the game of the week for me next week. I am so pumped to see that game, and I think it's a huge game for the SWAC East. I know I believe it's the Prairie View UAPB game. But for me, I'm so excited for that Alabama State FAMU game. But let's move on here, man. I'm going to call it struggle win, the struggle win segment. We got struggle wins for Jackson State and Alabama A&M against D2 opponents, Delta State and Tuskegee. And before we get too deep into this, I want to say this. A lot was made about how people are being unfair, calling out Jackson State and then not calling about Alabama A&M. Listen, a lot was made about these two teams and how they were the favorites in the SWAC. Both came into the week with major questions on one side of the ball, Jackson State's offense and Alabama A&M's defense. But both these teams left a lot to be desired this weekend. I'm not letting either one off the hook. And I don't think we should even let Alabama State off the hook for almost losing to Miles. These teams, if you're going to be as good as everyone says you are, you have to beat D2 teams by more than 7 and 10 points. That's just 100% a fact. And I know at Jackson State and Alabama A&M fans are going to have some excuses here or there. You got to be better. It's a standard when you are the face of the conference. And that's just how I feel about it. If you disagree, then comment below why you disagree. But for me, both of these teams have major flaws right now on one side of the ball. We'll start with Jackson State. They held on for a 7-point win over Delta State. And for me, so I want to start here. I thought so. I know some people weren't impressed with the defense. I thought outside of really two plays, the defense played really well. You allow that huge run up the middle late in the game and kind of brought it much closer than it should have been. And you also gave up one explosive play through the air in the third quarter. Other than that, they held Delta State to under 100 yards passing and less than 3 yards per attempt. That's outstanding, whatever you want to put it. They do have some struggles, I think, on the interior of the defensive line sometimes about over pursuing, but I've been vocal about that since the FAMU game. But I thought the secondary, especially without Dejon Nugget Warren, played fairly well for the situation. Now, the real concern for me comes on the offensive side of the ball. Shedeur, fine. We'll get to him in a second, but the offensive line and the running backs are just atrocious right now for Jackson State. These are real issues here, especially in a game where they should have overpowered their opponent easily. They were unable to establish the running game at all. Not even the slightest ounce of a rushing attack where they averaged 1.8 yards per carry this weekend. Peyton Pickett is not the answer, man. This guy came in from Liberty. I was confident he was going to be able to produce like he did at Liberty. He just isn't it, man. And I was impressed with some of the runs that they had as a team, but when you combine that with the pressure they were getting on Shedeur, with the inconsistency of Pickett, it just overall as a team, man, they did not look great. And I for me, the bigger problem is the offensive line. This is arguably one of the worst offensive lines that I have seen, man. It is bad. With all the talent they have, all the size, you can't block Delta State and you give up 5 sacks, and they are going to get Shedeur Sanders absolutely murdered back there. They gave up 5 sacks and countless hits that were unnecessary hits that eventually knocked him out of the game. The offensive line's got to be held accountable because Shedeur is out there putting up numbers. He's the only reason, in my opinion, that Jackson State's not 1-3 right now. This offensive line has got to protect him better, and they have to try to pave some rushing lanes because what I'm worried about is Jackson State's becoming way too one-dimensional. When you become one-dimensional, it is a major problem when you face, opponents that are on your level or just below your level because they're going to be able to exploit that. Now, luckily, Sanders is going to have 2 weeks to recover. I think he'll be fine. But this kid, as a freshman, has been the only player on offense that has consistently performed week in and week out. And like I said, if it wasn't for him, I honestly think Jackson State might be 1-3 right now. And they have a bye week to get everything straight. If I'm Deion Sanders, you have to readjust this offensive line. The interior, the guards and the center are getting absolutely wrecked week in and week out. The tackles, inconsistent, but they've had their moments, and I don't know what you really can do with them other than, try to work them up a little bit. But the interior of the offensive line has got to be fixed, especially with some of the defensive lines you're going to see down the line. You have to fix that offensive line. But overall, Jackson State found a way to win. Let's see what they clean up on the bye week, and we'll go from there because their next matchup is a huge one with the team I'm about to talk about right now, which is the Alabama A&M Bulldogs. But this offense for A&M, elite. We knew it was really good. 550 yards of offense. Akil Glass, 405 yards and 4 touchdowns. He did have 2 picks this week, but he took over the number 1 spot on the SWAC passing list with almost 1,100 yards. But this defense, man, this defense is atrocious. To give up 440 yards to Tuskegee and allow them to complete almost 50% of their third down attempts, unacceptable if you're going to be a top contender in the SWAC. Tuskegee is not even going to be in the top 3 or 4 offenses you will see for the rest of the year. You have to put a better product on the field if you're a defense. You have too much talent. And, I've talked to some guys who have played on this defense for Alabama A&M, and they understand that. Like, you have to play better than what you put on the field. And, the Troutman kid has been electric at times, but outside of him, man, there's been some really inconsistent play from almost everybody else. And every single level of this defense has to improve. The defensive line's got to be able to get to the passer much better. They have to be able to stop the run. The linebackers have failed to stop the run at all. Zero gap integrity, zero just alignment. They have all kind of issues in the secondary, other than being opportunistic because they have forced a lot of back end turnovers in terms of interceptions. They have to just be in position more and stop allowing so many, just find ways to stop drives, man. That's the number one thing. And for Tuskegee to just drop up and down the field on you from like the end of the second quarter onward is a major problem, because you are going to see better quarterbacks, better offenses, and you're going to have to get some stops down the stretch to win a game. Listen, I never expect Alabama A&M's defense to be like a Jackson State defense where they're just suffocating and all that. But at the same time, man, just if you could hold teams to like 20 to like 25 points a game and just be like an average defense, Alabama A&M would be so unstoppable. And on the flip side, the same thing goes with Jackson State. If you could just have like half of what Alabama A&M has in terms of offensive explosion, nobody would be able to touch Jackson State. And so, I mean, these teams are the perfect example of, like, if you just combine them, what a powerhouse you would honestly have. Now, I'm hard on these teams because, for me, these teams should have overwhelmed and just absolutely handled their matchups this weekend with ease. But all those question marks we've had about both of these teams all season really came to light in a big way, even against competition that wasn't on their level. And I understand both schools are going to have excuses, but I have higher expectations for both Alabama A&M, who I picked to win the SWAC, and Jackson State, who I picked to finish second in their division, right, like one game behind A&M. These two teams are the two best teams in the SWAC right now. If your two best teams are struggling with D2 teams, that is not a good look for anybody, and that's why I'm holding them to a higher standard. And if people don't like that, I understand, but for me, it's the same standard that the top two teams in every Power 5 conference, every other FCS conference get held to. If North Dakota State goes out there and struggles with these teams, calling them out too. Same with Alabama, same with whoever. And also, I mean, I'm an Auburn alum. Auburn struggled with Georgia State this weekend. I am not happy with that win. That is atrocious play by Auburn. So for me, when you have such talent as A&M and Jackson State have, I expect better against D2 schools, and that is how I feel. But looking at final takeaways, man, just some other games that happened this weekend. Texas Southern played a solid game with Rice. They lost 48-34. 21 points in the fourth quarter to kind of storm back and make that game much closer. A lot of people are super impressed with Andrew. I believe it's Bodie's breakout game, 350, 62 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns, and probably could be the future of this Texas Southern offense. There's not a lot of huge takeaways. No one thought Texas Southern was going to hang with Rice, but overall you have to be pleased that they were able to put up 34 points and show some sort of life and competitiveness down the stretch. So that's kind of where Texas Southern is right now. Prairie View wins the State Fair Classic over Grambling 24-10. This is one game I couldn't find anywhere to watch any clips while prepping for this episode, but based on all the stats and reports I could find from the game, it really looks like Grambling's offense is a real problem right now. Pass for Prairie View looks legit. I want to see him limit his turnovers. He's thrown like one less interception than touchdown. He's got to be more efficient, but we're going to find out exactly what Prairie View's about this upcoming week. And Grambling gets Alabama A&M, so they're going to have to try to find some sort of offensive consistency, or they're going to be in a lot of trouble moving through SWAC play. Then, as I'm recording today, Southern got a win over Mississippi Valley State, 38-25, in which a game that was a lot closer than a lot of people thought it might be. McDaniel was the star of the game for the Jags, 235 touchdowns, and showed some life through the air, which is something the Jags have been missing. But the next question for me is he going to be trusted to be the guy moving forward, and can he replicate this performance against better teams? That's the big question. The rushing attack was fine as always, 220. Kobe Dillon looked legit, averaging over 8 yards per carry. But Mississippi Valley's got some question marks too. I thought they played I thought they played well for Valley, and especially being somewhat competitive down the stretch. But overall, Southern just had more talent. So that's my kind of takeaways from some of the other games. I just didn't have time to break them all down in depth. But a quick looking ahead to Week 5 for the SWAC. The top we got some very important games this upcoming week, and I think we're going to get some real answers on some of the top contenders in the SWAC. Now, Thursday night, Arkansas Pine-Bluff traveling to Prairie View in a huge Thursday night game. We'll probably preview that game right here on this channel in like a solo preview. So I'm very excited to see if UAPB can bounce back from the loss and really to find out what Prairie View is made of. So I think this will be a very tough test for Pass and that Prairie View offense. Now, this weekend, Alabama A&M travels to Grambling. Should be an interesting game. Can Grambling's lack of offense show up against this Alabama A&M defense who lets everyone put up big numbers? And is Grambling's defense, which a lot of people think could carry this team, are they going to have a chance to stop A&M at all? We'll find out this weekend. And then for me, my personal game of the week is Alabama State versus Alabama State traveling down to FAMU to take on Florida A&M. I think this is a huge game for the East. If Alabama State can win this game, the East gets so interesting because then that Jackson State Alabama State game becomes huge. The Alabama, I believe it's the Magic City Classic, and Alabama becomes absolutely gigantic in terms of the East. So Alabama State traveling to FAMU on Saturday is going to be a huge game that I'm going to be watching very closely. But those are kind of the key games next week. Is also Jackson State is on a bye week. Like I said, I know a lot of people are kind of tuned into that. But guys, comment below your takeaways from all the Week 4 action in the SWAC, man. Comment below any questions, comments, anything like that you have from this weekend. Who are the contenders? Who are the pretenders? And what are y'all's early thoughts on some of the big games in the SWAC this upcoming weekend? We're going to, like I said, we're going to be dropping this episode on Mondays, 8 a.m. Central Time right here on the Blue Bloods, man. Wanted to kind of give some coverage to the full SWAC rather than just focusing on one or two teams. So I'm hoping y'all are enjoying it. Comment below if y'all have any ideas for the show, anything else that y'all want to see regarding SWAC football. But if you're new, smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, and share anywhere people might listen. But guys, appreciate y'all tuning in. But for right now, the Blue Bloods are out.